Welcome back, everyone. Next up, we have Avalon Advanced Materials Inc. It trades on the OTCQB under the symbol AVLNF and on the TSX under the symbol AVL. It's a Canadian mineral development company specializing in sustainably produced materials for clean technology. Please welcome its president and CEO, Don Bubar. Welcome, Don.
Thanks, Anna. Good to be back again.
We're happy to have you back, and we're happy to hear your presentation and some of your updates.
Okay. Well, our main focus these days is on our Separation Rapids lithium project. It's an example of one where I saw the future 25 years ago. Maybe it was a bit early, but it looks like our time has finally come with this resource. Your reminder that I'll be making some forward-looking statements today. Briefly on our corporate info. So as I said, I've got this company started back in 1995. Actually, it was a dormant shell company with a listing on the old Vancouver Stock Exchange, and been running it ever since, with our focus being mainly on these non-traditional commodities like lithium. And because we've been around for so long and relying primarily on the equity markets to stay financed, we have over 400 million shares outstanding right now and a market cap of just over 66 million Canadian. But a really promising future ahead of us here. And one of the things we recognized early on was how if you're going to produce these materials needed in clean technologies, many of the end users audit their supply chains to make sure they're produced in clean, sustainable ways. So we started doing everything we could to demonstrate that over 10 years ago, actually, and we've been producing an annual sustainability report for over 10 years. And last year we got a Sustainalytics ESG risk rating. So we're trying to now appeal to that growing ESG investment community as well, as I think we qualify in many ways. And because we've been around for a long time, we have quite a diversified asset base. I learned over the years that it's hard to predict where the next big demand will come from in these non-traditional commodities, because that's what drives the opportunity to develop the resources. So we created a diversified asset base on that basis. And for a long time, it looked like rare earths were going to be the opportunity, our Nechalacho project. But unfortunately, China relaxed the export quotas just when we were ready to get started and couldn't get the ball over the line. But we continue to try to expose ourselves to multiple different opportunities. And obviously now lithium is the one that is getting the most attention. And I always have been trying to educate people on how producing these non-traditional commodities referred to as critical minerals is a very different business from the traditional mining business. I like to refer to it more like an advanced manufacturing business, because it's all about recognizing where the demand is in the market, designing the product to meet the needs of the end users, and then you scale the operation based on the demand for the product, not tons and grade. That's a foreign concept to the traditional mining industry. It was only ever about trying to make the thing as big as you possibly could to keep your production costs low. But I'm starting to get some traction on that now and recognition that this is a very different business from traditional mining. And one of the main differences is that the first thing you have to do if you have some sort of resource is start taking samples, bulk samples, to do the process test work and define how you can produce that product and make it so it meets the needs of the off-takers. So this is one of the first steps. Once you have defined it, then you can start to look at how big the resource is. And this is one reason why I continue to try to advocate for historic mine waste being looked at as opportunities now and not perpetual liabilities. And that's starting to get more traction. It's been a bit slow here in Canada, but there's so many examples of historic mine wastes where they were developed decades ago for one traditional commodity, where the rock had all kinds of other stuff in it that had no value then but does today. So we have to look at these now as opportunities and starting to get more traction on that. But as I said, we're starting to get some attention now in government here. And Ontario announced this new critical mineral strategy back in March. And a lot of the things that they put into it are things I've been advocating for some time. And now the federal government here in Canada is starting to develop their strategy on how they can support new critical minerals supply chains as well. So things are moving in the right direction finally. And I think this will be a really big opportunity for the whole Canadian economy to finally take advantage of the very diverse mineral resources we have throughout the Canadian Shield, and start to attract more of the downstream value-added manufacturing capacity to take advantage of the access to the resources here in Canada. That was never done in the past. And the lithium battery materials is already doing that for obvious reasons. And I'd like to always emphasize how this creates important new opportunities for First Nations in the North. Many of them are still in fairly remote locations and do not participate in the economy, but I've been trying to point out how there are many, many lithium pegmatites of various sizes throughout the Canadian Shield. And First Nations just need to start to recognize this as an important new economic development opportunity where they can start producing these in trial quantities and produce them in ways that do not have any significant environmental impacts. One of the issues we've had with the industry here in Canada for quite a while is many, many people and First Nations have been indoctrinated that mining does nothing good and only destroys the environment. But I think that message now is getting through that there's many critical minerals that are going to be very important in new technologies for a cleaner environment. So our Separation Rapids property is located in northwestern Ontario, north of the town of Kenora, which is on the Lake of the Woods that extends down into Minnesota. And we're pretty close to a lot of infrastructure there. It's just north of the main lines of the Canadian National Railway and CPR, and we're close to 2 hydro dams. And that's one of the opportunities we're going to try to take advantage of too, is be able to access clean energy produced by the hydroelectric dams that are just to the west of our project site. And actually now there's an opportunity for the First Nation to take advantage of that too, because they are now asking First Nations to take ownership of new transmission lines that are in their traditional territory and allow them to earn the revenues from it. So hopefully that is inspiring for the First Nations, Wapsimang, that we're in the traditional territory of. And that can benefit us in terms of achieving net zero in terms of our operations going forward. And our Separation Rapids is a very rare type of LCT pegmatite, where the principal lithium minerals are pedalite and lepidolite. And pedalite is one that you don't hear a lot about because it's not that common. Most pegmatite resources you hear about spodumene, but pedalite has been around for a while and has been an ingredient used in high-strength glass ceramic products. And that's an area where there's starting to be growing demand. And so we're going to try and produce pedalite both for that market and the battery materials market. And lepidolite can be also concentrated to recover lithium from as well. And it also contains other elements like cesium, and we'll be able to produce other byproducts from this resource. There's tantalum minerals in it, and the K feldspars are enriched in rubidium, and that's another valuable industrial mineral byproduct. That's one of the neat things about these pegmatites is there's lots of potential byproducts, and almost nothing in it represents waste. Leftovers would be quartz and feldspar that you could use as aggregate. And as I was just saying, that's a real interesting opportunity now to take advantage of how this particular lithium mineral pedalite has been and still is in growing demand for high-strength glass ceramic products. It was what Corning used to invent Corningware cookware, and now there's lots of other examples and increasing innovation on other types of high-strength glass products. So the demand is going to continue to grow, and they always want to use lithium mineralite pedalite because the alumina and silica are also ingredients in the glass batch, and it's just a convenient way to add the lithium into the total batch formulation. So interestingly, we're getting a lot more demand for pedalite now. We announced a week or so ago that we have a new offtake agreement with a major international glass ceramic manufacturer, but that's just one of many that are expressing interest in securing a new supply of pedalite, because the traditional sources in Central Africa, primarily in Zimbabwe, China now controls them. And so there's a real global shortage right now. And we have one of the few large pedalite resources in the world that is ready for development. So we really want to be able to serve that market as well as the battery materials market going forward. And this is our land position. The original claims were taken to lease, and that's the area shown on the right side there in red. But we've added more claims to the property over the years, mostly to try to cover some extensions to the west, because these pegmatites occur in a belt that extends all the way over into Manitoba. And we learned that there are other similar lithium pegmatites on the northwestern part of the property that are potential additional resources for future development as well. And there was one in particular we found called Snowbank, because it's quite a big outcrop that looks like a snowbank that has very interesting looking pedalite in it as well. Very, very coarse grained. You can see picture down there on the right side and how big the outcrop is. And the coarser it is, the easier it is to concentrate it for the glass ceramic end users. So this is going to be a good opportunity to use another pegmatite to serve that market, while we'll also serve the battery materials market going forward. Hopefully we'll be able to drill it sometime soon once we get the permits and see just how big it is and what else might be in it that's of value. So on the battery materials side, our vision has been to establish a refinery to produce lithium hydroxide in a central location and Thunder Bay is the ideal location for that, because it's the transportation hub of northwestern Ontario. It's on Lake Superior, which means it gives us easy access to ship via the Great Lakes to Southern Ontario and elsewhere in Eastern North America and internationally to Europe as well. So it's a city that traditionally has relied on the forest products industry and are now looking for another industry, and supporting creating these new critical mineral supply chains is a really good opportunity for Thunder Bay to participate in it and benefit from economic growth there going forward. So we're getting quite a bit of support for a vision there, and we're now in the process of acquiring a property on the waterfront there. And we're just about there on that. It's taken a little while to access the debt capital to do it, but we should be able to disclose that within the next week or two. And the refinery is going to be by far the most expensive part of the business. And we recognized a long time ago that this is the key part of developing the supply chain, is the midstream processing capacity. So we started looking for an investing partner to help us finance it over a year ago. We thought we had one with an Indian company called the Asar Group, but they've been very, very slow to finalize an agreement with us. So we've been now talking to a lot of other players in the space, and as was just announced 2 weeks ago, we've signed an MOU with LG Energy Solution, who are a major Korean battery manufacturer, and they're planning to establish a production facility in southern Ontario and looking for a supply of lithium hydroxide. So we're in good shape now to become that supplier, and it's a good chance, while we haven't defined all the terms in the MOU yet, that they could be a supporter of establishing that refinery for us in Thunder Bay. And we're getting other interest now too from many of the electric vehicle manufacturers are also looking to Canada as a good source of all the critical materials that are needed in the new electric vehicle technology. And there's also a lot of interest amongst Indigenous business now in investing in the refinery and supporting getting this supply chain started so other First Nations communities can take advantage. So things are looking good. We've created a wholly owned subsidiary called Avalon Lithium Inc. that will be the refinery owner. And that's who we want to have come in as a partner with on the refinery, is partner in Avalon Lithium Inc. We did a PEA on a model for producing lithium hydroxide way back in 2016. And this slide shows the numbers, but with an updated stuff in red to indicate what the profitability might look like now. If you assume a long-term average price of $20,000 a ton instead of $11,000, the profitability looks very enticing. And actually, prices are much higher than that right now. So we'll see how profitable it can be, but it's looking very good. So the next steps on this project moving forward are basically we're working now on getting the site prepared, upgrading the access road, and preparing the aggregate permit site we have to host a demonstration scale DMS plant that we can use to start producing the petalite concentrates. And recently, we've got more interest in it, and potentially an investing partner now that wants to support us in getting the petalite supply chain started as soon as possible. So that's looking pretty promising now too. And while we secure the location, that should happen within the next week or two for the battery materials refinery in Thunder Bay, then we can get going on all the finalizing the feasibility studies on both the site, Separation Rapids, and the refinery site, and get started on construction. Hopefully it's next year, and begin by producing trial quantities of the petalite, because all the end users in the glass ceramic sector always want to have a trial quantities so they can try it out and make sure it's going to meet their requirements. And then once they prove that, then you can enter into a firm offtake agreement, and we go from there. So this is a growth industry, not like traditional mining at all. And then while we're doing that, we'll look at how we can produce the various byproducts I mentioned earlier. And then hopefully we'll get the battery materials refinery established in 2025, 26, and establish it as a regional facility that will get started with concentrates from our project, both lepidolite and pedalite, and then be a buyer of concentrates from the many other potential new producers that can emerge in northwestern Ontario from the hundreds of lithium pegmatites that occur in the region. Lastly, I mentioned cesium there earlier, and it's now a very high demand product that has a lot of potential in new technologies too, because it's the most electropositive element on the periodic table. Every compound it forms is extremely stable, and there's lots of interest in how it can be applied in all sorts of new technologies that I've listed here. So we're keen to be able to start to create a new supply here in North America, because it's another one that China now has total control of. And we've got the resources, and this project called LilyPad is one where we have unique enrichment in the cesium mineral pollucite. It's a little bit more remote location. It's north of Thunder Bay near an Indigenous community called Fort Hope, and not too far south of the Ring of Fire, where the Ontario government's now planning to build a road to access it. So it could be that we'll get better access to from a new road going forward here too, to allow us to advance the project. But we may be able to develop it at a small scale in the short term to begin to show the market how we can produce this pollucite in very sustainable ways, and perhaps use our refinery in Thunder Bay to make cesium carbonate or hydroxide, whatever chemical form the market is looking for. Now we have one dike there. There's basically a field of LCT pegmatite dikes there of various sizes, but we have one that we named the pollucite dike because it's got pollucite all through the whole dike. Very unique. Never heard of another example of that anywhere else in the world, where the mineral pollucite is one of the main rock-forming minerals in a lithium pegmatite dike. So it's got lots of potential, and we actually have already designed a process for recovering the pollucite very efficiently. Lastly, I'll mention tin again. I always like to mention how tin is a technology metal that has not been fully appreciated for all the new technologies that it's being used in now. And this slide shows some examples of the many areas, including electric vehicle technologies, where it's being looked at for various applications, including anode technologies. It's used in solar energy systems, electronics for the solders on circuit boards, and lots of other potential applications. I mentioned it because we're trying to see if we can redevelop the only ever example of a primary tin producer in North American history, a tin Grison resource in southwestern Nova Scotia called East Kempville, that produced for just 7 years, but there's like 25 million tons of waste there that are full of not only tin, but a whole lot of other elements of interest now too, including lithium, indium, gallium, germanium, copper, and zinc that were not recovered at the time. So it's a really good example of a historic mine waste with lots of potential for recovery of non-traditional commodities from the waste while you remediate the long-term environmental liability. Hopefully we'll get access to it again. So it's just a matter of getting BHP out of the way, stop blocking our access. And lastly, just as this is our current management team and board of directors, diversified team. We've got a list of consultants there too, most of whom are people that we've had on board in the past and were retired. But we're now starting to rebuild the team here to grow the company as we get closer to production, and there'll be lots of interest going forward here too. So I'll leave it there and get ready for some questions. And Anna, you have a few?
Yes, we do. We got a few. It's fascinating all day to hear how many of these materials China controls. So, mind-blowing, eye-opening. Okay, Don. So talk to me about this. Since many U.S. and European investors still know Avalon mainly as rare earths equity, tell us a little bit about the latest Nicolacho, I'm going to mispronounce that, REE project. How do you pronounce that, Don?
Nicolacho.
Oh, I was close. Okay, so tell us about that.
Yeah, so that was our main focus. So 10, 15 years ago, and most investors in the U.S. remember us for that because we got a lot of publicity at the time for leading the charge on getting a new rare earth supply chain started in North America. But trying to relax the export quotas and that prevented us from getting the ball over the line to get the operation started. So we've hung on to it knowing that it would have another day. And we did attract the interest of an Australian company about 4 years ago. So we started to talk about how the original resource we had is down below about 150 meters below surface and highly enriched in the heavy rares. But there were smaller resources near surface that are enriched in the light rares. And we were thinking that they might create an opportunity to develop a resource at a small scale initially. They liked the idea. So I decided to just hand that ball off to them so they could get it started. And then maybe we could come in behind them once they get the whole supply chain going. And they've been successful in doing that, actually. I was just attended an event in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, that was they participated in. They're called Vital Metals and the Saskatchewan Research Council. And they're creating now this separation capacity for rare earths and the capacity for creating the magnet metals from the rare earths that are used, neodymium and praseodymium primarily. So this finally, we're getting the whole supply chain started now, and Vital Metals are establishing a facility to process the concentrates in Saskatoon as well. So it's good news for all of North America now on how Canada is finally getting that supply chain started now too. And hopefully we'll be able to take advantage of it sometime down the road once we get our lithium operation started.
Hopefully. Now, you mentioned Cesium and the lily pad project. So when might that project be developed?
Well, I'm hoping that maybe we can start at a very modest scale there because the dike has the high-grade pollucite in it. We were able to define a process using sensor-based ore sorting to concentrate it efficiently. And given how valuable it is right now, it's tempting to look at maybe not waiting for road infrastructure, and it's so valuable, just fly it out once we've concentrated. And we don't have to start a major mining operation. We could do something like large diameter core drilling to extract the rock out of the dike efficiently and see if we can concentrate it and ship it out by air for further processing. So that's my vision for what we might be able to do there.
Fascinating. Your projects map slide shows two others that you didn't mention, Don. Tell us a little bit about it. I think it's the Warren Township anorthosite and the Cargill phosphate. So what's the status of these projects?
Warren Township is another one that we've had for a long time, 15, 20 years. And it was an opportunity to create a new supply of calcium-rich feldspar, which has demand in a lot of ceramic-type applications as well. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get it started back then because we needed to basically get through all the regulatory red tape on, because it's another example of how you got to produce samples for people to try out before you can get a firm commitment on being able to sell it. So we've hung on to it knowing that maybe we would have another opportunity to develop it. Hasn't come yet, but maybe we will. And the Cargill phosphate project opportunity was another example of a closed mine site. It was developed just to produce phosphate by Agrium Nutrien a long time ago. And it's an example of a good example of a resource that was developed for one commodity, phosphate, where the resource is a mafic intrusion called a carbonatite that always has a lot of rare earths, scandium, and other rare elements like zirconium associated with it. So the mine wastes there are a very interesting opportunity to produce those rare elements from the waste only. In fact, the grades there are higher than a lot of bedrock deposits for rare earths, actually. But it's been challenging to do something with that because in order to get control of it, you have to basically inherit the financial assurance obligation, which is over $20 million. And that's pretty difficult for a small cap entrepreneurial company to do. So it's kind of stuck right now, but we haven't given up totally on it. Maybe when we get going here, we'll have better access to capital to move that one forward too.
A few questions with the last few moments we have remaining, Don. Glenn Bennett says you had a big jump in cash earlier this year. How are you deploying it and how long will it last? Plus, what sort of terms are you looking for an investment? Do you have a PPM?
Well, we have over $2 million in working capital right now, which is enough for our immediate needs. And it's just a matter now of figuring out how and where we can best access the capital requirements going forward without excessively diluting our shareholders.
And Steve Samuel says the valuation of Avalon is 5 to 6 times below many companies having less assets and prospects when compared to yours. So are we to presume that these companies are overvalued or that Avalon is on the verge of having its real value recognized?
I'd say the latter, because of our history and all the original work we did on doing the exploration on our lithium pegmatite was over 20 years ago. Many investors still don't realize that we have a very advanced lithium project because we were known as a rare earths equity for a long time. And all that work on defining the resource at Separation Rapids was done over 20 years ago. Whereas most of the companies now, junior exploration companies that are in this game now, are at the exploration stage and drilling and putting out lots of news flow on drilling results. Well, we haven't had the news flow because of how advanced we are, but we're starting to, as we get closer to be able to start production, and that will change everything once people realize that we have most advanced project in Ontario.
Now, Cedric H says, with regard to lily pad and cesium, will your production costs be competitive with China?
Yep.
There we go.
No problem. Well, it's in short supply now. There isn't a huge supply of cesium at all right now. So it's not going to be a problem to be able to find buyers for the products.
And Mike Hinsey says, you mentioned government grant money being made available to rare earth companies like Avalon. Where does that stand? And how does that tie into the development of the Thunder Bay project?
Well, it's become a big priority for our current federal government to support creating the critical material supply chains for EV and battery technologies. And they want to make sure that they can make that happen soon. So they are quite willing to provide financial support to aspiring new producers like us.
And Victor L says, when you discuss a clean environment for mining, is the proprietary in-house technology? And if so, is it leasable or sellable to others?
Well, some of it is not, it's basically new technologies that we've learned about that we haven't developed on our own, but just more efficient in terms of how you can do it from an energy standpoint and not creating a lot of toxic waste. And I always try to remind people that lithium pegmatites have nothing in them that's toxic to the environment. So there's risk in health.
You there? You cut out just a second. All right. Corey Pierce saw the announcement on the glass manufacturer. When does Avalon start to see the fruits of that?
Next year.
Great.
We do have a major international company now keen to support us in getting this whole supply chain started now. They have been a distributor of pedalite in the past and now can't find any, so they're keen to work with us to help us get the whole ball rolling now. So I think it's quite possible that we can start supplying the trial quantities that many of the end users need to confirm their offtake interest next year.
And can you provide the name of that company?
Not yet.
Okay. Dan Copeland says a new wholly owned subsidiary created for the refinery is solely for funds for that project. And if not, what percentage of the parent company operating costs will it incur?
Say that again.
The new wholly owned subsidiary created for the refinery, we might need to refine this question, is solely for funds for that project. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's designed to be the owner of the refinery because we wanted to make that a separate business that will get started with a supply from Separation Rapids and hopefully inspire other new suppliers to emerge to sell us concentrates for the processing part.
A few last questions regarding Thunder Bay. Will the Ontario or federal government be contributing to that refinery in a Thunder Bay as a partner?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest. Yep.
And how do you feel about green tech partnering up with Lithium America and building a plant in Thunder Bay?
I've met them. They seem to have a similar vision as we do. Who knows? Maybe we can collaborate with them at some point.
Can you go over one more time when you announce the location of the lithium refinery in Thunder Bay and when you expect that product can be shipped?
Well, it's probably going to take 3 years to get it up and running. So it's quite a big facility and takes some time to get it all built to make sure that it's operating properly to produce the product right on spec with the demands of the end users.
And Cameron Ross wants to know, do you have access to the Kempville site?
Not at the present time. We own the mineral rights there. But BHP still controls the surface rights, and they've been blocking our access. But getting quite a bit of interest now in the province, especially with the provincial government to support our aspirations there.
Last question for you, Don, from Simon. Was the time frame of 6 weeks mentioned in the announcement with LG a deadline which is stipulated in the contract, meaning the shareholders can expect the deal being closed until November 3rd, the latest?
Yeah, that's what we're anticipating.
Great. Well, exciting time. So thank you so much for joining us. And please, we want you to come back and give us some updates, Don.
Okay.
All right, everyone.
Happy to
Thank
do
you.
that.
Awesome. Well, stay with us. We'll be right back with our next presenter.